This is really a good time.
Yeah.
It must.
A blast.
Vern didn't just mean being off limits inside the junkyard or fudging on our folks or going on a hike up the railroad tracks to Harlow. He meant those things, but it seems to me now it was more, and that we all knew it. Everything was there and around us. We knew exactly who we were and exactly where we were going. It was grand.
My name is Stephen King.
Welcome to Filmstrip and our reviews of selected works of Stephen King featuring Nick.
Kiss me, fat boy.
And Jay.
Sometimes that is better.
These podcasts will be spoiler-filled and contain in-depth discussions of the plots, characters, and themes.
Hey, what's the big deal? Who cares?
All content used or discussed in this podcast is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.
I'm going to scare the hell out of you.
And now, here are Nick and Jay.
Welcome to Continuous Play Podcast Filmstrip. I'm Jay.
And I'm Nick.
And this is our review of Stand By Me, starring Will Wheaton, River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, Jerry O'Connell, Kiefer Sutherland, and Richard Dreyfuss. Directed by Rob Reiner, released in 1986 on a budget of $8 million, grossed over $52 million in its run. Considered one of the best story adaptations of Stephen King works, and the one that really introduced the world to the softer side of Stephen King, if you will. So, Nick, you seen or read this one before?
Oh, both. Yep, I have read it and I have seen it multiple times.
Okay, I have as well. I'm very familiar with this one. I mean, this is it was hard to have grown up in the 80s and not seen this, particularly because if you grew up during that time, most likely your parents were from this time. And, you know, my dad saw this and saw it on cable and wound up going out and or no, actually, I think he saw it in a video store and heard about it and rented it. And he and I watched it. And of course, he was a part of that generation and related a lot of those stories and stuff. It's just another one of those things. Like a lot of times we start these podcasts, we start talking about these older films. It will involve stories around my family, particularly my dad, who introduced me to a lot of different kinds of movies. But he was a big Stephen King guy, and he liked this one a lot. This is based on a short story called The Body, and like I said, this is sort of the softer side of Stephen King. You know, before we've done the haunted house kind of thing, or the haunted person, I guess you'd say, with The Shining, and then we did the trilogy of terror with Cat's Eye, and then we did Werewolves with Silver Bullet last time. And so now we're doing something there's nothing supernatural about any of this. It's just kids and kind of their imaginations and, going out on a bit of an adventure in the 1950s.
Yeah, this is like one of the Stephen King adaptations that, you got you got the supernatural ones, you got the scary ones, but this one kind of fits into with Misery, fits in with Dolores Claiborne, fits in with the Shawshank Redemption real well, that it's just, just a straight character piece. There's really nothing really scary about it. It's just a real simple plot, and it's all about the characters and just their interactions with each other.
Yeah, I mean, it's really what it's about. It's about these groups of friends, and particularly two friends, our two main characters, and we'll get into that in a bit. But there's two others there that you mentioned, Misery and Shawshank Redemption, that we'll be getting to as a part of this selected works of Stephen King retrospective as we go forward. We're not doing Dolores Claiborne. I know, to the chagrin of many Kathy Bates fans, but we're not going to hit that one. But you're right; it's in that same vein of things. There's nothing supernatural about it. There's no vampires. There's no witches' coven. There's no Satan making deals with people, for their souls or anything like that. It's just kids and kind of what it was like to be a kid during this time. And I don't know, an interesting take. And I guess we need to do the plot, and then we can get into this, because we've got to talk about the actors in this, because we know them from so many things, I think, in their adult lives as much as we did as they were child actors too. So if you will, Nick, please give us the plot summary of Stand By Me.
Not a problem. Based on Stephen King's short story, The Body, Stand By Me tells the tale of Gordy LaChance, a writer who looks back on his preteen days when he and three close friends went on their own adventure to find the body of a kid their age who had been gone missing and was presumed dead. In the group, we have Gordy, who has recently lost his older brother in a Jeep accident, and his entire family is struggling to keep it together. His best friend, Chris Chambers, who is seemingly destined and determined to grow up to be a troublemaker, Teddy, the eccentric depressive who is easily recognized by his mangled remains of his right ear, and Vern, the fat, oafish butt of all jokes, who has overheard his brother and one of his hoodlum friends discuss the finding of the body of Ray Brower. The boys set off to find the body so that they may become local heroes, or so they think. Meanwhile, the local hoods, led by Ace, plan to do the same thing. Gordy and Chris meet up with Teddy and Vern at the train tracks where they realize no one's brought food. They take out their money and agree to buy something along the way. As the train approaches, everyone but Teddy gets off the tracks. Teddy imitates shooting an automatic at the train, intent on dodging it at the last second. Just like my father in Normandy, he would say. Chris, however, pulls him off right before the stunt can be performed and yells at him for nearly killing himself. They soon arrive at the local junkyard and is rumored to house a disgruntled owner with a furious dog named Chopper, which is supposedly trained to attack any intruders, going right for the person's balls. However, the yard is empty, and the four rest in the shade of a car hood for a few minutes while Gordy, after losing a race, goes to retrieve food at a store on the other side of town. On his way back, he notices the others scrambling over the yard fence and turns in time to see the owner, Milo, yelling for Chopper. Gordy frantically runs for the fence with the dog close on his heels, but makes it over the top. He turns and sees Chopper is not the dog he expected. Milo rushes over to the fence and berates the four boys, making fun of his dog. Teddy throws a few insults, but is shocked silent when Milo calls his father a loony. Teddy breaks down, shouting that his father stormed the beach at Normandy and is led away by the others. Following the train tracks, they come to a bridge. They hesitate to cross, unsure of when the next train is due. Feeling confident, they begin to cross, with Chris and Teddy in the lead and Gordy trailing behind with Vern, who's chosen to crawl instead of walk. Midway, Vern loses a comb that he packed in his shirt pocket, which he'd hoped he'd use once they find the body and report it to the local news. Gordy consistently looks back and bends down to feel the rails. A light vibration leads him to see plumes of smoke in the distance. He shouts train and yells at Vern to get to his feet and run. They're barely able to make it to the other side of the tracks before the train comes. After telling funny stories around that evening, Chris confides in Gordy that he hates his family name and the association he has left with them, wishing to leave for a start fresh somewhere and actually make something of himself. Gordy and the others take a shortcut through the woods and land in a swamp infested with leeches. They strip down and Gordy finds one attached to his lower extremities, fainting after removing it. Eventually they come back to the train tracks and discover Ray's body knocked clean out of his shoes and lying in some bushes. They decide to build a stretcher for him and Gordy breaks down, crying that his father truly hates him and knowing that he favored Denny. Ace and the rest of the gang appear and demand that the boys leave so they can take the body. Chris insults him and Ace pulls out a knife before Gordy fires a gun into the air. He threatens Ace, saying it'll be easy to kill him, and Ace leaves. Gordy announces that no one will get credit for the finding Ray, and they instead report it through an anonymous call. They return to town with Gordy narrating that it seemed so much smaller after their journey. As the boys split up and headed home, Gordy narrates that Vern and Teddy grew distant over the next few years. Vern married straight out of high school and had 4 children and became a forklift driver at a lumberyard. Teddy attempted to join the army but was rejected and eventually served some time in jail. Chris managed to stick it out in school with Gordy and went on to become a lawyer. However, he was stabbed and killed as he tried to break up a fight in a fast food restaurant, which is the very article Gordy read at the start of the film. Was the guy Samuel L. Jackson?
No.
I'm just thinking like Coming to America.
Yeah, no. More like Superman 2.
Gordy closes the film as he finishes a memoir he's been writing about his childhood and leaves to take his son and friend out swimming. Dun, dun, dun.
None of those moments really in this one. Like you said, big character piece. And I think that's where we got to start. We got to talk about our characters here. And in doing so, I guess we'll talk about the young actors that portray them. We'll start off with Gordy. Will Wheaton. Now, I only know him from one other thing, and that's the fact that he was on Star Trek The Next Generation, a show I was not a fan of, but that I did watch some of, so I know him from that. But I assume he may have done other things in his life, but really I know him from this and that show, and that's kind of it.
I kind of know him from the Family Guy joke. Will Wheaton, or however he says it.
Yeah, with the emphasis on the H. But yeah. But you know what? I'll say this: Richard Dreyfuss plays the older Gordy, and as I understand it, they went through multiple actors for that. They wound up shooting the Dreyfuss stuff late in the process and getting him to do it. I can kind of buy that Will Wheaton would grow up to become Richard Dreyfuss. Like they do work together, though. I think Will Wheaton's probably a foot taller than him in real life. They have similar mannerisms, and I like the way Will Wheaton plays this. I mean, he really has to carry this film for a chunk of it because he's the voice of everything that happens. It's all coming from his point of view. So essentially we're watching his memories, but he's also having to expose himself because a lot of this is really about him and his family and the fact that they lost, his older brother Denny and a cameo by John Cusack, and that, and whether it's real or not, his perception that his family, his father in particular, favored his brother. And they're all kind of dealing with that loss. And I liked him. I think he's one of the things in this that you can always go back to and like. He's a real likable kid, and he comes off as just a likable character. I like Gordy in this.
Yeah, definitely. When I was watching this, I was just kind of getting flashbacks of the Wonder Years. So much with just like the whole way it looked.
Yeah.
And even this plot with his brother dying, didn't it remind you like a lot of Winnie Cooper's brother dying?
Yeah, it had a little bit of that going on for it. But here's another one. The next film we're going to talk about is It. And a big subplot of that is the lead character's brother dying. And so again, these recurring themes with Stephen King, I mean, he does this over and over again. And I mean, I can't watch this now knowing what I know about It and not see Bill and Georgie in this and not think of that when I see Gordy and Denny. I mean, it's just that same thing with these two. And King repeats those over and over again.
Yeah, King is very much, he loves to reuse plot elements and, very much he likes to use locations. I mean,
yeah.
The movie in this takes place in Castle Rock, and if you know anything about Stephen King, I mean, Castle Rock is a very, very, used place for him. He uses that a lot as like a setting, or he mentions it a lot.
It's interesting you mentioned that, though, because they note it as Castle Rock, Oregon, not Maine. Normally I catch that, but I don't know if that was Rob Reiner's choice or what. But this is set in Oregon and not Maine, because so much of Stephen King stuff, you think of Stephen King, you think Maine, right? I know The Shining wasn't there, but almost everything else is in Maine, right? Well, we've talked about it. Everything, the other two films we've reviewed have been, at least partially in Maine. 2 out of 3 in Cat's Eye, and then all of Silver Bullet was in a small town in Maine. So yeah, you're right. It's this small town in Maine. And I found that interesting, though, that they make a point of saying it's in Oregon. But I'm like, yeah, this is weird because Castle Rock is a place that you hear him mention often. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why they did that. I mean, I guess when you kind of look at like the scenery of the film and everything, I mean, it kind of does strike me more as like a Oregon, maybe the Dakotas, Montana type setting. I don't know why. It just kind of hit me like that with like, I don't know. Just seemed like it kind of came off more like that than Maine. I always, when I think of Maine, I'm thinking more of a wilderness look, even though like this was in the woods and stuff like that. It really didn't have like that. If you watch like a lot of other Stephen King movies like Misery or something, when they're in the woods, it has more of like a lush feeling, which is how I always feel like Maine feels like, where this kind of felt more like the country. So maybe that's why they did it. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be.
I'm kind of just guessing.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. I mean, that's a good point. But back to Gordy and kind of Will Wheaton, I just like the whole thing that I guess his whole persona in this. He's somebody who is clearly the smartest one in the group and got a lot going for him, but is clearly damaged and has things wrong. He's got problems. And I like that he's so vulnerable.
Well, I think it makes it relatable to anybody. I mean, who's never had problems with their parents or, ever felt, if you have siblings, I mean, there's always going to be that little sibling rivalry there, or it's a little bit of jealousy. And by having the brother die and then having that, him feeling that way about his dad, I think it really just kind of makes him a lot more relatable to the audience.
No, I agree totally. Now let's move on to his best friend, Chris Chambers, probably the most famous, or I guess I should say infamous member of the cast here, River Phoenix, the late River Phoenix, I should say, died, only a few years after this, really 5 years later after this. But of the Phoenix clan, he was the wild one. And he plays a kid who's essentially hell-bent on self-destruction for whatever reason here. And it's weird to watch this now knowing how River Phoenix's life ended and all the problems he had and stuff like that, and that he basically crashed and burned early. And Chris Chambers' whole thing is that he's pretty much sure he's just going to crash and burn out and be nothing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you totally get that he was almost kind of playing himself in this. I mean, you think of River Phoenix, you think of a bad boy, you think of someone who was bound for self-destruction, and that's what he was playing in the movie, and that's exactly where his character ended up. There was absolutely no redemption for this character in the movie, and when you hear the end of it, when he talks about how he died. And, yeah, it's, he does do a very good role, though. I think, actually, out of the movie, he is the standout. And, honestly, who didn't have a friend like him growing up?
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, everybody has somebody you can relate to like this. I'm so reminded of a guy that I was in Boy Scouts with that, I mean, he looked like Chris Chambers if Chris Chambers had dark hair. He was so like the spitting image of him, talked like him and stuff. And the funny thing is, and recently I caught up with one of his relatives over the holiday break, and he's doing great, married, got multiple kids, doing fine or whatever. But, boy, you were just sure this guy was going to meet the wrong end of a chainsaw. When you knew him in his preteen and teen years, because he was just crazy, but he was smart enough to realize that if he would align himself with the right folks, he could make something out of himself. He was a hard working guy and a hard guy who came from a hard family. And he's sort of that one out of the generation that decided not to let that beat him down. But I like Chris here, and I like the way River Phoenix plays him because he is vulnerable. And as you learn through the story, and when you learn that he's dead at the end of the story, you totally get it, because 2 or 3 different times in this film, he stands up in between people. He's the guy that gets in the middle of things. And so you totally buy that he would grow up to become somebody that would try to break up a fight at a restaurant and would get killed in the process.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when he pulls him off the train tracks, when he pulls Teddy off the train tracks and everything, he very much demonstrates that he's willing to put his life on the line to help someone out.
Let's talk about old Teddy there. We've already had our first Corey Haim film. It's time to get Corey Feldman in the old mix here now, too. Corey Feldman plays Teddy Duchamp, a tough-talking, kind of weird kid who he's in a weird spot, right? Because he's eternally proud of, and you feel like in some ways trying to live up to the shadow of the hero that his father is. But his father's also the one that beats him and, burned his ear off on a stove once. I mean, somebody who's obviously gone through a lot of what we would call post-traumatic stress now in the wake of what he saw in World War II. What did you make of Teddy, and what did you make really of the way, our buddy Corey Feldman plays him?
I felt really bad for him throughout the movie. I mean, you can tell he's really a troubled guy, and he's just trying to pull the most positive aspects from an abusive father he can. And you can just tell, even, like when that Milo guy was insulting his father, just how, he just went off about it, and it's just, he's got that. It's almost like, I think when Milo said that he was almost trying to convince himself by yelling at the guy and saying he's going to rip his head off and shit down his throat, that he's almost trying to convince it to himself that wasn't true. That's the way it came off to me.
Isn't it the mark of like people that have been abused is that they will often defend their abusers to those that try to confront them when they're in the denial stage, and especially as a kid,
Yeah, you see it on Cops all the time when there's an abusive relationship and the cops come and the woman's going, I don't arrest him, I love him. And it's like, yeah, he just beats you up. Okay.
Yeah, it's, you're right. You're exactly right. And particularly with kids, and Stephen King does this often with abused kids are a theme he will use a lot in his work. It's in a lot of different places. Sometimes it's very subtextual, sometimes it's very outspoken like here, but it's a character trait or arc that he often employs to tell a story. And the thing about Teddy that's interesting is he and Chris are just as tough. Like they're both tough kids. Like you figure if they fought each other, really threw down, it would probably be a draw, or 5-5 over 10 good scraps, But the difference is Chris knows kind of the loser path he's on, and he's struggling and trying to get out of it. Teddy is convinced that he's not going to turn out that way, that it's not that bad. And as we find out, yes, it is. And he goes down that, kind of sad loser path.
Yeah, he's the type of guy, he'd get into a fight and get his butt kicked, but he'd keep on getting up and keep on taking it more. He just doesn't know when to stop. That's just the kind of character I took him as.
Exactly. And then last, Vern, Jerry O'Connell, the star of Scream 2 and My Secret Identity. That's the only thing I know him from until he did Piranha.
I know him as Mr. Rebecca Romaine.
yeah, he's that as well. But, a long-time actor, right? But the funny thing is you look at this pudgy kid and the fact that he grew up to be this 6'3", kind of hunk is funny. I mean, he's just a sack of potatoes here, though.
Yeah, definitely. I like his character, though. I think he's funny. He's God, I mean, you can say it for every character. We all had friends like this growing up.
Everybody had.
We all had the crazy kid. We all had the one kid that came from a really bad household.
Yeah.
We all had the fat kid as our friend.
We all had the fat, funny friend. And you know what? I know exactly who that friend of mine is. And he doesn't look like Jerry O'Connell, but he is a tall, skinny drink of water now as an adult. And it's funny to think about that because he was just a butterball when we were this age. And it's funny to me to think about that, but he's very much like Vern. The butt of the joke, but he doesn't mind being the butt of the joke because he's funny and he likes to be funny. And I kind of, you always respect a friend like that will laugh at himself a little bit. And I kind of like that. And I think, the funny thing is Jerry O'Connell, if he has anything at all, because he's incredibly bland for the most part in any of the roles he's ever played, but he has really good comedic timing, I think. I've always thought he had good comedy, and he does it here. He has good comedy. And, I mean, you read some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, the way the other kids pick on him, like, they sort of conspired to come up with that stuff on the set, and Rob Reiner just let them do it to him to see how he would react. And the way you see Vern react is how Jerry O'Connell reacted to them. And you kind of dig that. I mean, it's neat to watch kid actors actually get to be kids in a movie instead of trying to play 30-year-olds in a 12-year-old's body.
No, definitely. And I think just also why these child actors work so well is, many times you watch a movie and the child actor's terrible, Phantom Menace or, there's numerous movies, but like the problems with those movies is the kid's never able to be a kid. Not put in like a normal situation where a kid would be put into and be able to act that way. Whereas that's why I think this movie works really well is you got, the preteens, teenagers, and they get to act like preteen teenagers in it.
Exactly.
Play them, and they all are playing themselves in a way.
Yeah, they really are.
Perfect casting for perfect roles for them.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you have to hand a little bit of this too. I don't know what you make of Rob Reiner, but I'll tell you what you get Rob Reiner for. If you want kind of witty comedy and you want real kind of poignant Americana Norman Rockwell type of direction, that's what he's good at. And for a guy that came up on all of the Family and some of the things he did, coming through as an actor, he's kind of as an actor. But I'll tell you this, as a director, he has a real touch when it comes to this kind of light drama, and he's good at sort of infusing comedy and drama together, particularly when it's like family units or kids and things like that. I've seen him do it in a lot of different films that he's directed, and I think he really hits the stroke here with this. This may be one of the best films he ever did, in my opinion, as a director.
Yeah, before he kind of went off the loose end towards right now. He's a little too obsessed with smoking.
Yeah, I mean, he's a little. I think the South Park guys have parodied that pretty well, but but he gets a lot out of these guys, and I think there's one other one that we've got to mention specifically, and it's Kiefer Sutherland, who's in his total like Lost Boys days. It's so hard to not watch him now, having been a big fan of 24 like I was, watched every season of that show, and not see Jack Bauer every time I see him. But I also remember him as, the Lost Boys and Flatliners. And I mean, I've watched Kiefer Sutherland pretty much his whole life, but I remember him in this role. And he looks like all the hoodlum kids my dad described going to school with, and that were like his older brother's friends or the enemies in high school and stuff. He just comes off as such a menace. And I don't know, Donald Sutherland has played bad guys before, but he doesn't really have a menace. There's something about Kiefer Sutherland's eyes that he just does this thing, and he just has such a menace to him that it's overwhelming. But he is incredibly effective in his role as Ace here, the sort of head of the Hoods.
It's his eyes and the way he talks. It's just when he gets that mad, he's like talking down to you. Notice the way he kind of like tilts back his head, and he gets kind of the squinty eye thing where he just kind of talks down to you, like you're like an ant. And anytime I think of Kiefer Sutherland, I think of David from The Lost Boys.
Yeah.
It's just, and this is almost like, these are almost like, I don't know, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Where they're like, these characters are almost soulmates in a way. I mean, this is probably who David was before he got turned.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, this could be like David's grandfather. If David's a kid of the 80s that got turned into a vampire, then this would have been who his dad or his grandfather was in the 50s. Just this tough guy who talked a big game, but like a lot of bullies, when you finally stood up to him, he would back down. And Stephen King does this a lot when it comes to bullies. I mean, I can't watch this and not think of Henry Bowers and It. We'll get to him in a week or so. But I mean, that's the same kind of thing as this huge bully that you're just waiting for somebody to finally put him in his place. And at the end there, when Gordy finally does, it's and the way Chris is talking to him and stuff, it's pretty neat. And you wonder if they ever took a real beating from him for that. Or if he was just all talk. I mean, that's the thing about Ace is you think he is, capable of doing what he's talking about, but then again, we don't really get to see him do anything. He just talks.
Yeah, definitely. I think he's just all talk, and the whole thing too is, we got John Cusack, who I didn't even realize that was John Cusack at first, playing Gordy's brother, and to me, it's just like, I think that with Ace, it's always going to be talk. I think in the end, somebody's brother's always going to stand up for him if anything ever got out of hand. So with me, I always thought at the end of the movie that it's all talk, and he wasn't going to do anything for, who the kids were. And, it's just typical bully. All bark, no balls.
Yeah. And Chester would have definitely, gone, sick balls on old Ace there. But yeah, I mean, that's our cast here and stuff. Now, like you said, and you went through the plot summary, we got a lot of detail there. It is really simple, though. It's, Vern, he overhears his older brother and a guy talk about, we should have called the cops. What are we going to do about this? No, we boosted a car. We can't tell anybody about it. And he comes and tells his buddies, hey, I know where a dead body is. And I love how, they're all messing with him, and then he drops that line on them, and they're all like, what? And they were like, oh, yeah, we got to go see it. And they just immediately come up with this little scheme. And I thought, well, that was a really just a great plot turn, because we're introduced to all these characters very quickly, and then we're immediately on the road with them.
Yeah, definitely. To me, it's just like, we're talking about, we're going to do the movie It, and it's just like, God, this movie is so much like It.
It really is, yeah.
I mean, I think if Stephen King would have not had the epilogue for this, novella about what happened to these kids, I could really see it being the sequel to this story. Because really, I mean, Ace is definitely Henry Bowers. I mean, those guys are basically the same character. And even all these guys, I mean, you got Vern, that's the fat kid in It. I mean, all these guys are just perfect as it. So it's like, yeah, I mean, throughout the whole movie, I'm thinking, boy, this is a lot like It.
That's a good point. And, the thing is this came out in a section of short stories in 1982 or so. It was written over a long period of time around the same time. They didn't come out in the book till 86, but it's in the same time period. I'm not surprised that Stephen King, doesn't plagiarize himself. I mean, he's known to do that. We've called it out so many times already. He does. So it's not surprising that they're so similar. And I think it's one of the reasons we stuck these two together, because they do have such similar stories, these sort of coming of age tales where these seemingly, castaway loser kids have to overcome all these odds to tackle some feat. These guys, though, don't have any supernatural foes. Their whole thing is they're really trying to go 23 miles to see a dead body and not get caught by their folks and not get, killed by the elements. And they're trying to outrace this group of hoodlums that are also trying to get there first and I love the whole motivation. It's the same motivation every 12-year-old ever has. Man, we'll be famous. We'll be on the news.
Yeah, I think it's a realistic plot. I mean, you think back to when you were this age and stuff like that, and it's like being boys and everything. It's something you would totally do because at the time, I mean, you're a kid, you think you're immortal. You have absolutely no basic regard of what death is. So I think, hearing like, oh, a dead body, you're thinking almost like a movie sense or TV show sense, and I think it's actually when you go, if you fast forward a little bit in the movie, when they actually see the body, it kind of hits them like what it actually is. And it's just like, I love the element of that, how it's like they go from like really wanting to do this to when reality hits them and, mortality hits them, where it's like they have a complete change of character.
They go through so much along that way, and particularly our two leaders. I mean, the thing is Vern and Teddy, as much as they can do, they're really following along here. They're there to be support to Chris and Gordy. And at two different times, Chris and Gordy sort of confide in each other about where they are. I mean, Chris is the one that confronts Gordy about, look, I know that your dad favored your brother and you do too. And stop trying to act like it and stop trying to act tough and be one of us. You need to stay in school and take care of yourself. You're not going to be a loser like us. And then on the other side, Gordy gets Chris to open up and talk about, don't you want more out of your life? Don't you see you got potential? And Chris is like, yeah, I'm just afraid I can't do anything about it. It's that whole back and forth. So they've been there with each other. So when they get there and they see the body, and Gordy just loses it, Chris is the one that's like, hey, guys, we got to go make a stretcher. Just leave him alone right now. He needs to kind of deal with this. Because you hear from Gordy early on, I didn't even cry at my brother's funeral. And you get that when he sees this Ray Brower kid, this is the first time he's really dealing with the death of his own brother.
And that's what I was trying to get at, too, is just like, I think, we all remember, we can all remember the first, like, major family death we had to deal with. And I think a lot of times when you first see it, or deal with it as a kid, if it happened then, you almost don't take it as reality. And I think in a way this is just reinforcing the fact to him that it's like, his brother died and, his whole life's changed and everything, and that's why he's just completely breaking down. I mean, I remember when my grandma died, it's like when I heard that she died, it was like nothing. It was like, oh, okay. But not until you actually just you come to terms with it, whether, it's a funeral or in Gordy's case that it really hits you. And the first time it hits you, I mean, it's like nothing else.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, it's an experience that it can't be described. It can only be lived through. Like there's just no way to really tell anybody about it. That's why, you hear people talk all the time about, especially my friends that have children and stuff. How do I explain to my kids about so-and-so passing away? When's too young? When's too old? And that has got to be a delicate balance. I mean, I can't remember how my parents handled that, and I don't know that they did. I think it may have been one of those things that I just figured out as I got older, but that's really what these kids are figuring out. And particularly what Gordy is coming to deal with here. This whole story is about death. If you think about it, I mean, you got the dead kid. All right. You got his dead brother. And then the whole impetus of the story is the fact that his best friend from childhood has been murdered. And even though they hadn't seen each other in a decade, obviously they were still friends, and they, enough he would have kept up with him and recognized it when he saw the article in the paper. And this is Gordy's way of kind of dealing with that, is writing it all out. And in a lot of ways, you know that, and Stephen King always puts writers the central of his stories often when he's dealing with something too, and it's Stephen King dealing with, how he came to understand death.
Yeah, and to me, like, this is like the quintessential coming of age story, because really, I mean, what are each of these characters doing in this movie? They're coming of age. They're realizing who they are, the paths are coming down, and it's perfect. It's just the most. You hear that phrase a lot for these type of movies, but this is like the absolute perfect definition of what that phrase means.
Well, think about in the 25, 26 years since this movie came out, how many times you've seen this repeated and copied. I mean, at least a dozen, if not more. You know, I mean, they've recreated and tried to recreate the drama of this so many times, so much so that they'll describe films as it's Stand By Me on ice, you know, or whatever. I mean, that's what people say. And when you, and even the song, you know, it was named, you know, they didn't name it The Body because they thought that would be really confusing and they didn't feel like that title was really indicative of what it was about. So they came up with Stand By Me and they just picked that song, the Benny King song, out of the pile there because Rob Reiner's a big fan of that music. And that was a renaissance for all of that stuff. I mean, that song was everywhere. You couldn't go anywhere without hearing it. And now I can't hear that song and not think about this movie. I mean, they're just tied together, you know, and then that trope became something to do with everything. Let's find some old 50s song and couple it with this coming of age story. You know, I mean, that seemed to happen all the time in movies. So this film is so influential because it was the first of its kind, or at least was the first in a long time that did it right.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, I'll even bring up it. I mean, I know we haven't reviewed it yet, but it's like, I really think even like when they did the TV, I'm not even talking about the novel, I'm talking about the TV adaptation for it, is like, I think they borrowed so much from this movie as far as just the look and feel and even just like character choices. So much, even, you know, Stephen King work was borrowed from this, and you watch even other movies that are considered to be, you know, coming of age. I mean, you got like The Sandlot, or you got like, you know, it's that one with the guy from, the little kid from that show with the guy from Breaking Bad, Malcolm in the Middle. It's his,
Frankie
Spotted, that Spot in Me one, or whatever it's called. It's like, so much is just borrowed from it as far as just the movie, I mean, the music that's played, and just the look and feel. I mean, when you watch The Sandlot and you watch like this, I mean, don't they feel like the same movie almost? Just like the look and feel of everything and just the music cues.
Oh, yeah, totally. But I mean, even like a lesser film like Rookie of the Year, you know, or something, still does the same kind of stuff. I'll give you another one. Think about Big with Tom Hanks. That came out 2 years after this, okay? And there's so much about his friendship with his little friend in that, too, that feels very much like this, because they're the same age, you know? And Penny Marshall's another one of those, like Rob Reiner, that does those kind of sappy, you know, romantic drama comedy things, you know, and that's what Big is in a lot of ways. And that's another coming of age tale, but it, again, borrows a lot from the setup of this film. And like, I mean, when you do something right, I mean, if anything we know about Hollywood is they're going to recycle it, right? If you do it right, they're going to try to redo it as many times as they can. And I mean, geez, how many times has Rob Reiner tried to redo this? I mean, remember that movie North? I mean, that was a terrible film, but it was pretty much trying to do this with just one kid instead of, you know, several. You know, I've seen him do this, you know, several times. I mean, anytime he's trying to do things with kids, you know, it seems to come back to this and sort of these same tropes over and over again. And it's the interesting take of him. And he's one of the guys, though, that is a distinction of having directed two Stephen King adaptations, because he's the guy that came around and did Misery, too. And I think it's interesting that they handed him that property when it came time to do it again. We talk about that when we get to that podcast, but again, I can see why, because he would understand when there's not supernatural elements involved and you need somebody to play up I guess you'd say the natural things that happen between people that can seem fantastic at times. He's a good director for that. And this story and the way it arcs and the way it works, it would work in that same situation.
Oh, definitely. I think, yeah, I mean, when they chose the director for Misery, I mean, I think just how much this movie is very much a cult classic, very much influenced them to do Misery, and I think, you know, that story really fits the tone and theme of this movie as far as, you know, people, you know, just, maybe not theme so much, because they are completely different movies, but just like the tone and feel.
I think the tone and feel is right. And let's talk just a little bit, too, about you know, there's really not a lot to the story. I mean, we could lay it out there. I think you hit the nail on the head a bit ago when you said it's great to see kid actors get to act like real kids. You know, these kids do what preteen boys do. They mess around in the woods. They talk about girls some. They talk about their favorite show. They sing the theme song. You know, they're talking about this, that, and the other. And then they try really daring and stupid things. You know, Teddy's run on the train tracks. And not only him doing that, but the way Chris pulls him off, and then that whole bit at the end with Chris is like, "Hey man, we're cool, right? You know, and like, you know, give me 5, it's fine, right?" Like, he's not going to let him walk away till they're square. And Teddy's just defiant, like, I could have made it. I could have made it. You're going to get yourself killed. You know, what did you make of all of that?
I just made it as just close friends. I mean, how many times was, you had friends doing stupid stuff, whether it was, you'd be going out, hanging out at the mall and someone's trying to steal something, or, someone's just acting a fool looking for a fight one night, sometimes you just got that one level-headed friend that can just grab them and not care what the guy's reaction is and just be like, stop it, man, just kind of like, that harsh love type thing that sometimes, people have for each other, where it's like, I'm going to slap you across the face and straighten you up. And that's kind of how I took it, and something that the guy needed, because honestly, I didn't think if he would have done that, he probably would have got hit by the train. So in a way, he saved his life. I mean, he completely saved his life.
Totally, yeah. And you get the idea that after you hear later on that they grew apart, is that Teddy lost, somebody in his life that would pull him off the tracks before it was too late. Like I wouldn't have been surprised if the story had ended with, and one night Teddy decided to play chicken with the train and got too close. I mean, I guess that's maybe too stereotypical and too tropey, but it would have made sense if that's how it ended with him.
Yeah, it could have been, but I think also him seeing that body and everything like that probably maybe set him straight, because look what happened to that kid. He didn't win the fight with the train. Not many things do. Yeah,
this is true. And you know what? That's another thing. We never know why Ray Brower got killed. Just that he did. And it's safe to assume, like you did there, that he probably was just playing on the tracks like they were. And as Gordy puts it in the voiceover, he knocked him clean out of his shoes. He had no idea what even hit him.
Yeah, which actually, believe it or not, I had a friend in high school who did that.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah, and like I said, not many things win that battle, and unfortunately, maybe a little graphic is watching the movie, I'm like, the body wouldn't be intact if it got hit by a train.
No, you're right, and you're probably not, and that's the unfortunate reality of that is that but like you say, these kids had no idea what to expect. And that's the thing they never really talk about, but what do they expect to find when they get there, right? And then when they find it, it's almost like, we can't let we're not going to take glory for this. This isn't about fame. We need to get this kid to his parents and let them know that, he's gone, and let them take care of this, because it's not right for us to try to be famous for this. I mean, that's what I got from that.
Well, I think their whole journey, they grew a little bit. I mean, they're already close friends, but I think in a way that they just bonded even more. And I think them, seeing like, the pulling off the train tracks, or, the one guy having a leash on his wang or something, just how, like, they felt for each other, and also when they see this kid who's their age dead, and I think in a way it kind of just rang back to them, like, that could be them or one of their friends, and, how would they feel if that was one of their friends, and just hit them like, dude, we're using this as like like a scavenger hunt, and that's not right, and we need to really, do the right thing here.
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right, and it is about doing the right thing. Yeah, I mean, and the right thing is we're going to make an anonymous phone call it in, and just let the authorities, take care of this. But I love the final showdown between Ace, his group of hoods, and the kids. And it's this gun that Chris has stolen from his old man or whatever, that Gordy has grabbed out of the pack, and he's got it leveled right at Ace. And I had no doubt in my mind, I mean, he would have probably fired a round off at his foot if he needed to scare him away. I mean, the resolve in his face there is some of the best acting Will Wheaton does in the whole film, and he does a really good job in the film, but that's probably his best scene.
Yeah, definitely, and I have no doubt that he would have shot him in the head. I really think that at this point he was just tired of it, tired of this guy's crap. I mean, like I said, he's probably been picked on by this guy his whole life, and all suddenly they're going to show up, and, they've come closer together as friends and want to do the right thing, and then you got these guys coming there who are bad seeds to begin with, and they want to do something completely wrong, and something that, that they've actually earned before them. And I think he's just was tired of it, and I really think that, he probably would have pulled the trigger on him, and it may sound a little psychotic of me, but I think he's fully justified if he did. I mean, that guy is probably, they don't tell whatever happened to him, but you can just imagine what happened to him later.
Oh, I mean, he wound up in prison somewhere. He's somewhere in
Shaw. He's in Shaw.
Shawshank.
Yeah. He's one of the sisters in Shawshank.
Probably so. So,
Yeah, why didn't he add him in there, man? That would have been
probably because you forgot the character. But I'm surprised.
Man, I should be his freaking editor, man. Stephen King, call me. I know you're listening.
Yeah, I'm sure he's found our podcast by now. Well, look, I think we're at the point of the podcast where it's time to give our final thoughts, recommendations, and popcorn ratings. So, what are yours for Stand By Me?
Very high recommendation. I can't give it an extra large popcorn because there's been so many movies that have done this. I'm not going to say they've done it better, but it's just a movie that you've seen many times. And, you say that all the time, like, movies like, Halloween and stuff, they've been ripped off and copied that it almost kind of hurts them. And the way that does it to this movie a little bit, because I've seen this movie so many times in different forms, but it's still the best of the breed, and it's still a very good movie. So for me, I give it a large.
I join you in that large popcorn. It's not extra large because it's not perfect, but it's really, really good. And it's just a good, sweet story. And I'll tell you, it never gets old. But I'll say this: it's one of those kind of films that it hits a nerve with you, and I think it's one of those that's best watched with a member of that generation, either nearby or at least within a phone call's distance, where you relate with them and talk with them about this time. It always makes it more fulfilling for me, at least. But I recommend it as well. And I think it's one of the better Stephen King adaptations that's ever been done. And it's one of the better things we've ever reviewed here. And we've kind of hit around a lot of it. We can walk through it piece by piece like we do a lot of films because it's just so good and it's worth just watching. So if you've never seen it before, folks, my goodness, please go watch it. I mean, it's available at every kind of video outlet you can find. It's out there. So please go check it out. We recommend it. You won't be sorry. And definitely a large popcorn all the way. So
and I got to bring up too, I mean, I don't want to kind of blow the whole thing before we review the movies, but it just seems so funny that the best Stephen King movies tend to be the ones that aren't horrific.
You're hitting on something there, and I think by the time we get to the end of our retrospective, that'll be a question we need to answer. Is he a master of horror, or is he just a really good storyteller? I mean, it'd be interesting to have that discussion later on after we get into this. But you know what? Next time, man, we're definitely going deep into definitely one of the more horror stories of Stephen King. We're going to do It, the 1990 TV miniseries adaptation of what many people would consider, and I would be one of them, Stephen King's best work and one of his most engrossing books. We'll talk all about that next time, but can't wait to get around doing that one. Probably going to be a long one, but going to be a lot of fun, and look forward to doing that. And we've decided to do something too. Initially, Nick, we were going to do 10 Stephen King adaptations, but we decided we needed to expand that by a couple of chapters because we did the trilogy of terror that was Cat's Eye, and both were largely unsatisfied by it. And you brought up a really neat point that what we really ought to do, if we want to do Stephen King adaptations like that, is we should do the Creep Show, 1 and 2. So they're both on Netflix right now. So we've decided, hey, we're going to throw in those 2 Creep Show flicks as well. So you're getting those as well, folks, here in the early part of 2013 as part of this Stephen King retrospective. But boy, we got so much other stuff coming up, man. Can't wait till we get around to reviewing some of the films that we've got lined up in the pipeline, tell you guys about them in the coming weeks. But for now, you can check out more of our stuff in our archive section at our website, continuousplaypodcast.com/movies. If you like the show, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps other people find it. Hook up with us on Facebook and Twitter. Let us know what you think, and we'll be glad to interact with you there. So until next time, for Nick, I'm Jay. Thanks for tuning in to Film Strip.
Thanks for listening to Film Strip.
Would you two just shut the up?
Visit our website, continuousplaypodcast.com, for more reviews and episodes. All content used or discussed in this podcast is the property of the respective owners and used under the Fair Use Act, Section 504, C2, Title 17.